The phrase separation of church and state is not found in our Constitution. It was originally penned by a group of churches in Danbury, Connecticut, to then President Thomas Jefferson, who was president in 1802. They were concerned that their religious liberties, because the Baptist Church at the time was a minority, they were concerned that their religious liberties would not be preserved in this new nation, under this new Constitution, under this new amendment that had been added. So Thomas Jefferson wrote back to this Danbury Baptist Convention, and he talked about the wall. He affirmed the intent of the amendment as a wall, but it was not a wall to limit the church's involvement in politics. Rather, it was a wall that would keep the state from controlling the church as it had in England. It was a wall that would prevent the state from forming a state religion as it had in England. It was a wall that would prevent the state from forcing anyone to practice their religion in a specific way that the state might mandate. This amendment, Jefferson assured the people, offered protection to all religions to practice their religion freely. And Jefferson went on to explain in his letter that this was important because it served a purpose. And it wasn't only churches that could practice, but mosques and temples and gurdwaras and sanghas. Everyone was allowed to practice their religion freely because the church was called to act as the conscience of the state. The separation of church and state was not designed to keep the church out of politics, but to be assured that it stayed in. The state was to create the action, the laws by which we were governed, but the church was to be the consciousness of that action, and they were kept separate and free by this wall. This last week, Bishop Reverend Buddy, one of my colleagues, took a merciless beating from the media after she gave the inaugural sermon to the President of the United States. If you have not heard her message in full, I would ask you to go and look at it. It's about 15 minutes long. But don't make your opinion based on the damaging and degrading and disrespectful commentaries. Go and watch it for yourself. You have heard the same message that she preached from me, from behind this very pulpit. God's love is for all people, not just some. Compassion is always the lens of action. This is the non-negotiable position of the church. Love is always the lens through which the church must look, because it is the lens through which Jesus looks. Most mainline churches today follow what's called a Revised Common Lectionary. We don't generally choose the texts from which we preach from. They are assigned to us. They are picked out so that over a course of about 3 years, we get through most of the Bible. And the text that we wrestle with today in Luke 4 is perhaps the same text that Bishop Buddy was also wrestling with. And even this morning, as pastors around the United States wrestle with this text, they, like me, are probably wondering, what can we say to a divided church? While there are some that wish that the church would remain silent concerning politics, it cannot, and it should not. In our text this morning, Reverend Buddy wrestled with perhaps the same one, we see that Jesus is beginning his public ministry. It's day one, his entrance into the field, if you would. And in the preceding chapter of Luke, Jesus was baptized by John. We understand our baptism as our willing acceptance of a new way of life, dying to an old way of being and being brought forth from the waters of our baptism, a new creation. Jesus was baptized. And then instantly he was taken out into the desert where he was tempted with the same temptations that we are also tempted with: fame, money, and power. And succeeding in overcoming these temptations, we arrive at the text today where Jesus begins his public ministry. Luke writes in this chapter that Jesus was filled with the Spirit, and he begins to teach. His debut, his first day out. And on this day one, Luke defines the principles by which Jesus' ministry will be built. He tells us why Jesus is here ministering to us and what Jesus will do. Jesus stands in front of the synagogue and he begins to read from the scroll of Isaiah these words: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because God has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. God has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, to recover the sight for the blind. God has called me to let the oppressed go free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." If you read on in this chapter, you'll find that Jesus' message went over like a lead balloon, I guess you would say. It wasn't very well received. And we see that the people who were listening to him chased him out of town with their intent to be the nearest cliff with which to throw him off. This message that Jesus delivers is not easy for us to understand. It challenges us, even those who call ourselves devout, even those of us who have been Christians for a very long time. It challenges us because it asks something of us. And in that ask, it challenges our sense of comfort. To bring good news to the poor. What does that look like? To release the captives. To give sight to the blind. To let the oppressed go free. Jesus teaches us that power, as defined by God, is realized not by amassing one's own wealth, one's own fame, one's own power, but by freeing ourselves of this lure, of this anchor. God's power is discovered when we use our gifts, our wealth, our fame, or our power to build others up, to see to the betterment of those around us, specifically those who are suffering. Our gifts are not to be hoarded for our own advantage, but used in the service of others. Love is action on behalf of another. We witness this practice of self-giving, of self-sacrifice in many of our religious heroes. Mohandas Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Dorothy Day, Nelson Mandela, all of these people, Jesus himself, all of these people, when we look at their lives, what we see is that their willingness to give of themselves, their willingness to give of themselves, all that they had, not only lifted up others, but it empowered them in a new and different way. We all recognize the name of Harriet Tubman. And we recognize her as a woman who sacrificed everything to lead others out of bondage. But even we admire her, right? But listen to these words that she says. She says, I freed 1,000 slaves, and I would have freed 1,000 more if they had known that they were slaves. You know, sometimes I think we don't know what we don't know. We think we can see, but we don't know what we can't see. The liberation that Jesus offers us, the ability to receive good news, the willingness to see, the release from oppression. Jesus isn't just talking about breaking some physical shackles or repairing inadequate eyeballs. Jesus is talking about breaking the bonds that hold us captive to the temporal things of this world. Jesus is talking about freeing us, giving us the ability to look through disinformation, to look past denial and fear, those things that keep us from even beginning to conceive of the freedom that is possible for all people through God's love. Jesus teaches us that it is not on our own, but in the proximity of the other that we loose our own chains, that the scales fall from our own eyes and we can see. When we bring that good news, we become recipients of good news. When we release the captives, we are released from our own captivity. When we offer sight to others, we begin to see. Jesus' message is for all of us, Democrats, Republicans, independents. We all need to give up, to lay down our rightness, our entitlement to comforts, especially at the expense of others. We all need to walk on that narrow path of faith that asks us at sometimes to admit that we don't really know. We don't really have all of the answers. And consequently, we are required to pick up humility, kindness, curiosity, and care for our neighbor, especially those different than ourselves. And when we do these things, we discover our own small ways of thinking, our own blindnesses, our own things that we all have that keep us captive. And in seeing, we then become liberated from those things that keep us from embracing God's love most fully. Jesus directs us away from our self-serving natures and back to the heart of God. This is also the job of the church, Christ's body on earth, to remind us that money and fame and wealth are temporal. And the only thing that passes over, the only thing that lasts for eternity is love. It is the job of the church to teach that to chase these temporal things is futile. It's a dead end. It's incapable of producing any fruit. To find the eternal, we are not to shut out the other, but to open ourselves to the possibility of truths beyond our own. Jesus' teachings back in the first century were off-putting. They were unsettling. And still today they are. I hope that we do not throw the message over the cliff or the messenger, but instead that we lean into these eternal truths and open ourselves to the good that God desires for us when we make ourselves and our gifts available to those whom God chooses to love through us. May it be so. Amen.